Good evening, fellow educators. As I look out to the audience today, I'm excited to have this opportunity to share my experiences both as a learner and as an educator. In order for you to understand why I have become the compassionate teacher I am today, you need to understand my experiences as a student. I was an emergent bilingual speaking English and Spanish in my home. I was given the label as an English learner, and I had an unrecognized learning disability. I grew up in a predominantly Anglo community, and many of my teachers had misconceptions about my future, based solely on the color of my skin. I once overheard my third grade teacher telling another teacher that it was a waste of time to provide me with the extra support I needed, since I would just end up pregnant and drop out of high school. Well, today I am proud to say I finished high school. No, I didn't get pregnant during those years. I have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and several credentials. My fifth grade teacher told my very young mother I was learning at the appropriate pace of a new English learner. But this was not the case because I wasn't a new English learner. So my mother had to be my biggest advocate to have me assessed and find out I had a learning disability. I remember being in sixth grade and sitting in my IEP meeting. When they were sharing the results, I learned I was reading and writing at a first grade level. On the other hand, I was very high in math and problem solving. I was performing at a high school level. I finally knew what I was good in at school, and I received my first A in sixth grade. These experiences as a learner pushed me to become an educator whose students could count on. I started teaching with a fifth grade general education class with 38 students, of which 4 were deaf of hard of hearing students, mainstreamed all day in my classroom with an aide. As a new teacher, I was given the ELs, the academically struggling, and students with challenging behavior issues. I knew I had to find ways to motivate and engage these students. I strategically seated my students in the classroom. My aide would do sign language, and she would sit at the front of the room. As I taught key vocabulary words in the units, I had the students learn the sign for that word. I was applying the most used learning styles, which was visual and kinesthetic. The classroom climate and engagement was welcoming, and students would come to school excited and safe to learn. After having this group, I decided to go into special education as an RSP teacher. However, that was not the way things turned out initially. My first assignment as a special educator was at the Los Angeles Central Juvenile Hall with the boys unit. This experience was very emotional and challenging for me at first. I had a self-contained class with many young men who had outdated IEPs because they had dropped out of school. Many of the IEPs focused on the same thing over and over. I don't know how many times I saw the Pythagorean theorem listed as a learning goal for these young men, year after year. I had to tell myself that they were still young people no matter their circumstance. They required guidance and support. Most importantly, they were looking for someone to believe in them. I had to find creative ways to bring tools and manipulatives that could help these young men engage in problem solving. For example, most of us use response boards with dry erase markers, but the markers might be used for purposes other than education. So I purchased the dry erase crayons instead. This was a surprise for the boys, since they had not used crayons in a long time. When it came time to work with angles, I could not use the protractor or the compass, as they were considered weapons. So I had to find ways for them to measure angles with other tools that would not be considered dangerous. I remember one young man telling me I was not a real teacher. The next day, I displayed a copy of my degree and my one-page IEP from 6th grade. I set up my expectations and boundaries. I told them if I could make it to college and get a degree, then they could too. I challenged each student differently because each one had different needs and circumstances. I found out what I needed from students by taking the time to get to know them. This is challenging when your classroom population changes daily. Most of the boys were learning multiplication, division, and pre-algebra concepts and skills. I also started to find ways to motivate them to continue to learn about other subjects. Math was easy because it's everywhere. The next subject that was easy to connect with the students was history. Most of these boys have never been out of Los Angeles County. They only knew their neighborhood. So I started connecting historical events that occurred in their neighborhoods during World War I and II. I was hooking them for a desire to research and learn. One young man once asked me, "Miss, why are you always smiling? Don't you know this is juvenile hall?" My response was, "I smile daily because I'm thankful to be alive another day to come and see you." This threw him off, but it was something I knew he enjoyed hearing. What person doesn't appreciate hearing this? The day came when it was time to change student population, and I went into a moderate to severe 5th and 6th grade classroom. This is the current population I work with in Anaheim. These students, just as the young men I worked with in LA, were labeled at risk, or there's no hope for them, and were seeking my help. Prior to arriving in this self-contained special day class, I had no idea what touch math was, which is a common intervention approach. I was told literally have students touch a number like 5 as a way to develop number sense. I tried it with my students, but the strategy was really just nonsense. It was not helping my students to understand concepts of number and arithmetic. I started attending many math conferences and workshops, and yes, I learned a lot, but they were all geared to the general education population. I remember sitting at my desk one day writing goals for my students and planning my lessons for the week, and I thought to myself, why am I not exposing them to the same curriculum as their peers are learning? So I started with introducing fractions to my students, a concept my students have never been exposed to. I started with identifying fractions and front-loading them with vocabulary. This year, I started implementing fraction tiles with my students. Students who are usually nonverbal were shouting out terms such as denominator, numerator, half a fraction. My students were engaged and enjoying the time they spent with the manipulatives. My students have fine motor and gross motor challenges that require typical instructional tools to be modified. For example, just like Jill mentioned, we also use Rec and Recs in my classroom. However, the first set I was given, the beads were too small for my students to manipulate easily. So I purchased a jumbo size Rec and Rec. But where Jill's primary learners use it to make 5s and 10s, the Rec and Rec I use has 10 rows of 10 beads. So students can not only add to larger quantities, but also visualize multiplication with arrays of beads. I have some students who are learning their multiplication times tables, Most of them are having success with remembering them because this year I started by asking them to show me with arrays how they come up with the answer. It was very difficult and challenging at first. Once the students were given daily practice and various ways to see arrays on the jumbo reckon rec, on a hundreds chart, and with different manipulatives, my students figured out how to count by 2s and 5s, which helped them to multiply by these factors. I started implementing math talks daily in my instruction. I was told my students would not participate because they were nonverbal. However, they just required the right tools to communicate and show me their thinking. I know my students are learning and they are excited daily with their learning. Parents have told me they have seen the growth in their students. I have only told you of 2 examples where students have been denied the opportunity to grow and learn because of their labels. But when given access to meaningful learning, ended up showing me their brilliance. I went into education to challenge such deficit views and to demonstrate to others that all children are eager to learn if they are given the opportunity. Thank you. So there's a bigger modified reckon rec that I use in my classroom also, because I do have a lot of students that tend to be in wheelchair bound or table bound. And there's the 10-row one. And then that's the success of my students. They're showing us powerful stuff right now. Thank you.